All right. I hope you had a good week and weekend. I appreciate everybody. Well, everybody who was able to watch the thing last week. I think we had one person show up, which is always nice. It's always much nicer to have somebody else responding than just me because it gets really boring very quickly. But I wanted to talk a little bit about grades and assignments and perhaps get some feedback from you
Sure.
as a representative of the class as a whole about how things are going. And I noticed about a quarter of the people that have signed up for this class are pretty much on top of things. And
Mm.
about a third of the people are working on catching up. And then a few people have kind of dropped off and not done much.
Yeah.
And there's been a couple people who I'd like to name names, but I'm not supposed to, were in that last category. And over the last 2 weeks, they have just been turning in a ton of assignments. And it's really nice because some of them are things that they already did and forgot to turn in.
Mm.
Some things are things that people were supposed to turn in and or did turn in already. And there were a couple like they're missing a point or two because they didn't put the accessed on phrases.
Hmm.
And a couple people turned in projects that were really cool, but they weren't tied directly to the material of our course. And so that's kind of hard as I can't give them any credit at all. But if about 9 times out of, actually about 97 times out of 100, if somebody talks to me, I'm so good at BS that I can help them write an introductory paragraph for most stuff. So they just have to tweak it a little to get it to fit the class.
Yeah.
And, and pretty much the sky's the limit on the project. As long as
Oh,
it's something that is
um,
fascinating to you and it ties to the coursework, you can do whatever you want.
well, remember how you were like, hey, just do a maquette, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yep. Sure, gonna be a maquette. Sure about that. It's taken on a life of its own. But I'm in it, and too bad, and I'm gonna turn it in. It's gonna be great. I'm obsessed.
Well, and the problem has not been, oh crap, how am I going to fill up 10 hours of work? That has not been the problem. The problem has been, what you're going to be doing is twice as long as what I needed.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, if you're in the middle of the project and you realize you're going to have to spend a lot more time, several people, I told them, okay, break this down into different projects and turn in those segments for the previous projects that you haven't done yet.
Sure.
And that's a good way to do it too. Um, but again, there's 6 projects that are 3 to 5 hours a piece, one 10-hour project. I know that sounds like a lot, but it's actually not. I mean, when you go through the PowerPoint, by the time you're done putting together a PowerPoint, and then you record yourself reading the PowerPoint
Hmm.
on a Teams meeting to yourself, I mean that's your 3.5, 4 hours right there,
Yeah.
and you can do that in an evening. Um, and there's no reason not to get stuff done. If you feel like you need more time, I'm not talking directly to you, Kelly.
No, 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 I know.
Kelly's one of those weird people that she sees an opportunity to do extra work and she dives at it. But
Just with
for
art.
for everybody else in the class, um, if you need extra time, if you need help doing stuff, please give me a call, give me a contact. Actually, don't call me, text me. We want to have a written record. That's why for the final grade or the final project, you've got to have the proposal email. You've got to have that sent in. And people have done that where they've talked to me through Canvas and that's one way of doing it. I don't necessarily like that because Canvas doesn't give me direct notification as
Mm.
soon as you put a discussion into an assignment. If you email me though, that always gets to me, and I can always get to that a lot faster.
Is this the first semester you've started to see this kind of reaction to the work?
Um, yes, I've been doing this kind of thing for about 6 years.
Mhm.
And this is the first semester where people have just kind of dropped off.
I
And
started
it's
noticing the same thing though with my students. I mean, it has uh the descent has been rapid and exponential. So I'm talking about kids who are like, I don't know, you might have a class with 80% Fs, and of those 80%, probably half of them you've never seen the kid. Like they just don't, it's like this apathy that's, I don't know, it's weird. And I'm not saying that, the students in this class are like that. I've just started to see a trend in education where it's almost like a trigger, like a switch. What is it when you trip the power and you just
a
stop?
breaker.
Yeah, it's like a breaker almost. Like one bad thing happens and then just out. They quit.
Well, and
And I
that's
don't know.
if we met in person, that's when a lot of people have questions about projects and things like that, and I can work through them. And
Mhm,
this is the first time where I've told people, okay, do this and this and this, and then call me and we'll talk about it.
mhm.
And I've never heard a response back. They've never be done
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
Most students are used to just getting one grade and that's it.
Mhm.
In my classes, up through finals, you guys can resubmit to your heart's content. There's no
Which is
reason
awesome.
not to get a perfect score.
Yeah.
The reason I do that is because we're handicapped not meeting in person.
Mhm,
And we're going to do the very best we can.
mhm,
But for everybody, uh, contact me if you have any questions at all. I mean, last year I had a student that well, actually several that did not understand, got really kind of upset. But when they took the time to talk to me, I was able to walk them through what the project was, and they went from a D all the way up to an A minus in a matter of 2 weeks. And it was just because we were talking and they were able to get their questions answered. And there are several people that haven't turned in anything after about the first month. At the very least, do your attendance, get those all turned in, and then do your weekly reflections. And one
mhm.
person brought their grade up almost a full letter grade just over this weekend by doing
Yeah.
that. And when you get those two things done, look at where you need your grade to be and talk to me, and we'll figure out what other assignments you need to do. But I'm happy if I need to, and you need the extra time. I am happy to hold off as long as I possibly can. I had two students last uh, um, uh, about a year and a half ago, who one student was coming back from Argentina, I believe, and another student was coming back from Europe, and
Mhm,
they weren't able to even get into the internet for the last week and a half of class just
mhm,
because of where they were. And so I talked to Van Magnus, and I was able to just redo their grades and submit them late.
mhm.
And that's I don't have a problem doing that either. So whatever you see your grade or grade points at, that is not your grade. That just shows you where things are right now. Everything that was turned in by 1 o'clock this afternoon is graded. If you also turn something in or you redo something or you add it to a discussion and I have not graded you, email me right away and make sure I take care of that. There's been about 3 or 4 people consistently who do that when I'm not grading things very quickly, and I do appreciate that. I don't want to say that's not a lesson that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, although that is true. What that is to say is if you're the kind of person that stays on top of your grade is always going to be better. I mean, that's just a natural consequence of staying on top of things. So as we go forward too, I think it's worth reminding people, we talked about this at the very, very beginning of the semester. Um, as we get into performance art and conceptual art from the 60s forward, we start looking at people like Rhythm Zero, which is, if you don't know what that is, look it up on YouTube. It is profoundly moving. And we see Judy Chicago, and we see a lot of artists. They use art as activism, and you know you're in an art history class. Everybody should know that by now. And I do not uh, promote or endorse on any level pornography. That's not what we're talking about. But when we look at like particularly Renaissance art, where the human figure is extolled and almost deified in the art, need to be aware that there are things that you see that very well may be offensive if you don't put it into context. And I try really hard to make sure that we don't get a lot of that because I don't want anybody to be caught off guard. But know that this is an art class. And the difference between um, the human figure in art and pornography is very simple. The difference is pornography is intended to commodify the human body and titillate or to excite. And that's not what we're looking at. We're not looking at commodifying the human body. Um, in fact, if you remember the stuff, the German expressionists, right before them, there were a few guys that, a few artists that worked with the human form that made the human form rather terrifying. And some of those also include Francis Bacon
Mhm.
and oh, that one kid that did a lot of inner city art, end of the '70s, early '80s,
Basquiat?
Basquiat. Yeah, yeah, and these are, and it's important to keep in mind that what we're looking at is not pornography. It
Mm.
is art, and the line is very clear in art history. If you find as an individual that it's difficult to navigate that, um, just let me know, and I won't hold you responsible for looking at the images that you find offensive. But know that this is an art class, and everybody are taking this class are adults. I've seen the paperwork. All right, so we're going to start going into the '60s and look at artwork that where the movements have continued forward through to today, and they've
Mm.
informed a lot of other movements too. And next week we're going to be covering a lot more of that. That is more dealing with uh, specific technologies,
Mm.
like technologies that came out in the late '70s, through the '80s and into the '90s. Okay, Kelly, I'm going to ask you a question. Do you know
Yep.
when the oldest digital photograph was taken?
Uh,
And a trick
18
question.
it's
Digital.
1868. Oh, digital,
Yeah.
sorry.
The oldest
Um,
photograph was taken in 1831, but the oldest digital photo,
no.
1957.
Really?
Yeah. But the technology, that one photo cost about $2.5 million to get to. And the technology for using digital imagery in art didn't really start showing up until, or for artists to regularly use, uh, until the middle of the space race.
Mm.
So, about 8 or 10 years. And then the first artist that really got into it, I think, that really explored it to blow your mind was um, Naim June Pak. And
Mhm.
we're going to talk about him next week. He's absolutely amazing. But the stuff that we're talking about right this week, it deals more with fundamental shifts in perspective of, again, of what art is and what kind of media an artist can use to make art. The reality is, most people, most human beings, uh, more than 95% of the things that we do in the day are routines, are habitual.
Mm.
We don't think, or we think about completely different things. And I know if you're thinking about something specific and you drive somewhere, it's pretty much a guarantee you won't remember the drive because your body has, or your mind has habituated driving to the point where you don't have to think about
Mm.
it. And that's been something that people have done for a very long time. it was during the 1800s, later part of the 1800s, that's when we start seeing uh, things like Hudson River School and emerging into um, Impressionism,
Mhm.
where artists start realizing, you know what, I can show people what I'm saying, and have them participate with me in generating the meaning of the art.
Mm.
And this is something that continues more and more strongly all through modern art, which is about mid 19th century to mid 20th century. So about 1850 to 1950. And then it really ramps up for postmodern art, which is roughly 1950 to the end of the century.
Mm.
But that isn't really fair because again, these are approximate realms. I mean, modernism did not start on June 14th at 7:30 in the morning in 1850. You know, it's just general trends of all these art movements that we looked at. So I think we'd probably call modern art is more of an art period, and postmodern is more of an art period rather than the other way around. And I think we could make arguments that if we looked at Bauhaus, that's probably more approaching postmodernism.
Mm.
And remember, the biggest difference between modernism and postmodernism is that modernism or modern art deals with abstracting meaning, simplifying and teasing out meaning with different visual languages. And postmodern art is not so interested in meaning and narrative. It's a lot more interested in pursuing the how far you can stretch materials and what materials do. So Soviet constructivism, for example, looks an awful lot like brutalism, but it's not entirely the same because Soviet constructivism, the message behind that is, or Russian constructivism is hope.
Mm.
You know, hope for the future, hope for the proletariat, hope for the common person now having some sort of political strength.
Mm.
And brutalism is primarily about demonstration of interesting things that the materials can do. Even though there was a lot of that in in Russian constructivism, in brutalism, that message is pushed a lot harder. So you can look at two things that look very similar, but if one seems to give the message of hope, it's probably more rooted in Russian constructivism. And if one is just a really cool thing to look at, and you're thinking, "Holy crap, I did not know cement could do that," then that's probably going to be more um, brutalism.
I also had a thought. I wrote in my what I learned this week. I go to London like twice a year. Love the place.
Oh, that just makes me sick to my stomach.
I no, listen,
Good for you. Good
I
for
don't
you.
have nice things. I
Rub it in my
just
nose more. That's great. That's fine.
ramen
Yeah.
every day just to go to London. But like I drive by the National Theater
Now,
because
when you introduce yourself to strangers, do you say, "Oh, by the way, I go to London twice a year"?
no, I usually say, "Hi, do you have anybody that's willing to marry me that has a London citizenship, a UK
Oh, okay.
citizenship?"
All right. Totally
That's what
different.
I say.
Okay.
And then if they say yes, I'm like, "Okay, let's go on a date." So, but because I go to theater, I love theater. And
Right.
theater in London is ridiculously cheap. Uh, it's affordable. And like we're talking $20 for Broadway shows where they're 200 here. Like it's ridiculous.
Or 900.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I go to the National Theater and every single time, even the Tate Modern next to it, I'm like, that is the ugliest building. Like everything is gorgeous all around it. And again, I have said those words so many times. And then you made the comment about brutalism. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this building, I'll bet you anything, is a brutalist building because London got annihilated during the Blitz. So not only would they be celebrating the rebuild and the concrete and the sturdiness of rebuilding their world, but here's this building that stands for, it's got to house something that they're going to hold together. And it's a celebration of the material. And now I'm like, okay, it's ugly with purpose, which I love.
Yeah, here it is.
I don't know what it
And
is
putting it
that's
into that
yeah.
context, it feels very different. Yeah, if this was somebody today, an architect today, just trying to make a statement, it would be a horrible statement. But if
Right.
you look at it in context, suddenly it's a lot, not only a lot more palatable, but let's see.
Look for the side views too. Look for other views. Like it's just blocky. Blocky isn't the best term, but it's like just yeah. Yeah. And like don't get me wrong, like I'm sure it's nice to certain people, but I'm like, eh. But
Well, and I don't, I'm not the kind of person that want people to believe what I do about things.
no, yeah.
I think that's a waste of time, waste of energy, and it's kind of silly.
Yeah.
But I think if you're taking an art history class, at the very least, you owe it yourself to learn enough about something and learn the context, so at least you can appreciate it and respect
Yeah.
the energy that went into it,
Which I love
regardless of whether or
because
not you like
yeah,
it.
exactly. And remain open to the fact that your opinions can change once you understand where you're approaching the thing from and where it's coming
Yeah,
from.
definitely. And I used to absolutely hate Henry Moore. He made me
Hmm.
want to throw up.
Yeah.
And when I started recognizing what he was doing,
Hmm.
and the first I started looking at his things and trying to understand and appreciate how much energy went into making it. And I thought
Hmm.
there was no way somebody's going to waste this much time on garbage.
Mm.
And then you talk to a friend that works at the mall at one of the retail stores, and you realize that their managers have that mindset anyway. But with Henry Moore, when I started realizing, okay, he's doing something serious, purposeful, and it's important to him. After a while, I started at least respecting it, and
Hmm.
now and that course took about 20 years. Same kind of thing would happen with Picasso,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about him a little bit too. But yeah, there's absolutely no reason to ever feel threatened if somebody has a different opinion than you
Right.
do about something. What gives you a leg up on people around you taking this class is we've talked about articulating your critical thinking with the four tools of artistic critique, which are description, analysis, interpretation, and then evaluation. When you do that, not only do you find out that there's a lot more going on than you initially assumed, but it also gives you the vocabulary to be able to discuss a different idea with somebody.
Hmm.
And that is so much more effective than marching in a circle with signs and screaming at people that you hate them because their ideas are different,
Yeah.
which is a waste of time and resources. But okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started.
Sorry. We can also, I can hijack the conversation whenever you want. Just tell me to shut up.
And what I've done is we have three different sections, and each of them have like three to five artists, I think. Except for art activism, I think that one has a few more, but that's because I think it is important. There is a difference between art activism and propaganda, and we'll talk
Okay.
about this. But Jean Claude and Christo, one of the things, this is one of their objects, and we'll talk a bit more about them. In the 1960s, one of the things that I remember as a kid that I didn't really understand in the late 70s and early 80s was, if you remember it, you didn't live through it, about the 1960s, which I think is kind of silly. But each of the time periods going through the 20th century are marked by different things. I mean, we have 1920s, we have the Bauhaus, we have Prairie style, we have Mexican muralism, and that goes into regionalism. In the 1940s, everything seems to be governed by suffering or reactions to World War II. In World War in 1910, that 1910 to 1920, we have Cubism because of changing technology and ideas about the universe, and Husserl and Heidegger. And then you also get World War I. And so you get these things where people are reacting to it. Remember that every time that there's a war or a conflict, you're never going to have people that you're never going to have every artist wanting to do the same thing. You're always going to have marching songs and love songs, and that's the way it is. You're going to have people post World War II that are incredibly depressed and just filled with anger and upset over their victimization. But you're also going to have people sometimes from the same camps, like I'm thinking of the psychologist that was in an internment camp in World War II. And of course, I can't remember his name. He's last week, 2 weeks ago, I mentioned him in the module. But he's the psychologist who mentioned that you put two people in the same circumstance, and one person will be suffering, and the other person will be looking for a brighter future. And the only difference is the decisions that they make and how they're going to react to it. And so we get stuff happening all the time. I think one of the big differences about the 1960s is the 1960s is the actual birth of the internet, believe it or not. And that happened because of the supercomputers that were built for the space race, coming out of the post World War II and throughout the 1950s, and military and the Cold War, military units, military compounds around the world needed to communicate with each other electronically, instant communication, that were not that could not be tapped by enemies, and they created basically an internet email service. And so I'm sorry for everybody who heard that it was Al Gore who invented it. It was not. It was the U.S. and British military. But so you get tremendous communication advances in the 1960s, but also throughout the 1950s, a huge portion of populations in first-tier countries had tremendous advances with just having a lot more money than families had before. You know, that this period marked the smallest disparity between the haves and the have-nots that the country's ever seen. And almost any job, from gas station attendant to office worker, you would have enough money to buy your home family a house. And most of the time, you could also get a car. And and this is astounding, unprecedented abundance. And what that translates to is a rapid transition and transmission of ideas. And so in the 1960s, people started questioning. I can't remember her name. I want to say Gloria Steinem, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't Gloria Steinem. One of these 1960s beatnik philosophers, said that fish never question the water they swim in. And 1960s started opening up opportunities for people to actually start questioning that. And you see philosophy and questions about reality seem to occur in societies where, for most people, the needs are met.
Were you talking about Anne Waldman?
Who?
Anne Waldman.
I think so. I can't, because she wrote a book. I remember reading the book. I remember coming across that and thinking, holy cow, that is so cool. But I can't remember the name. But yeah. And so when we look at the 60s, this is the time where people are also, among all other things, realizing that art can be used for different things. You don't have to tell people what to think. You no longer have to tell people what to think. You can give them the idea that perhaps they are autonomous to the point where they can think for themselves. Mm. And it's interesting to see how several different artists engage this. Now, this is one of the first wrapped cars that Jean-Claude and Christo did, 1963. What I love about this is they would do pen and ink and watercolor sketches where they would actually figure out what color of tarp they were going to use, where the folds would be, and how the ropes would be tied on it. And you look at this and you think, well, that's kind of random. Well, no, it's not. If we were doing this completely functionally, we would be wrapping the rope in a very different way than it is right here. And if it was completely random, it would look very different too. But some of these wrapping things that Jean-Claude and Christo did, they did half a dozen or more sketches where they would see where would the folds look the best, where would the ropes be serve if they were placed the best most visually. And one of the things that they were engaging is obviously they're not building the VW bug. Obviously they're not building the rope. Obviously they're not building the tarp. So what are they building here? What they're building here is a forced engagement between you, the viewer, and the object. Because when you see something wrapped as a human being, what is the first thing that you're trained to do?
Open it.
Yeah, exactly. They're engaging our monkey. The Prophet Muhammad called it our monkey mind, our raw curiosity. And one of the problems is marketing systems that were being developed and put on steroids after World War II to sell the goods that the factories were now making, since they no longer had to make munitions. The marketing was really dependent on you feeling inconsistent as a human being, and you feeling like your life is inadequate. You're feeling the need to consume, and to consume almost indiscriminately. And so a lot of people, this is where everybody was doing the 40-hour work week. Everybody was getting into a routine where you would work 50 weeks a year, and then you go on a vacation to celebrate, or you'd do something fun with the family on the weekend, but the life was very cocooned, and people were not thinking about it very much. But by doing something like this, the artist could engage your curiosity. And the first thing you want to do is, well, what is that? What color is the VW bug underneath? Is it in good shape or bad shape? Why are they covering it with the tarp? Are they trying to hide it? What are they doing? And so it's kind of fun because they're activating you as a viewer. You're no longer expected to passively exist as a viewer. You're expected to take a role, let your curiosity out. So I would like you to watch these videos. My favorite is this one, the Sound Smart. It's only a couple minutes long. It's very good. But this gives you a little bit of perspective on what the 1960s was all about. And the three different kinds of art that we're going to look at is conceptual art, makers as troublemakers, or art activism, and using the earth itself as a palette or a medium. So for this, with conceptual art, now I hope you guys remember the In Advance of a Broken Arm by Marcel Duchamp, which was one of his sculptures that was called ready-mades. They were called ready-mades because he found an object that was made already by somebody else in a manufacturing process, and very specifically, it had to have absolutely no intrinsic emotional value. So it had to be just an ordinary object. And this is one of the reasons why he only did a little bit more than a dozen of these over his entire career, because for him, it was becoming increasingly more difficult to find something that had no emotional attachment or value to him, because so many things were bringing back more and more memories of engagements he had had in association with that thing the longer he lived. But this is called 1 in 3 Shovels. And we'll blow this up a little bit. This is a printed definition of a shovel. This is the actual shovel. And this is a photograph, life size, of this exact same shovel in that exact same spot. And when we look at it with the title 1 and 3 Shovels, do you remember we were talking about who decides what art is and the allegory of the cave? The allegory of the cave, I want you to watch those videos as well. The allegory of the cave is essentially where prisoners are chained up to a point where they can, in a cave, where they can only see the shadows of things that are marched in front or between a fire that's behind them and their backs. And all they can see are the shadows on the wall of all these things, and they're told what the things represent. And one of the prisoners is freed and forced outside, and he realizes that all they were seeing were the shadows. And he comes back into the cave to try to tell the prisoners, his brothers that were still chained up, what reality actually is, and they think he's crazy. And so, of course, this is a metaphor, just like Kandinsky. One of you guys did a project on Wassily Kandinsky about his book Spirituality and Art, and did a really good job talking about the pyramid of prophecy, essentially. Where does the artist stand in relationship to culture? And the allegory of the cave ties into that beautifully, because the artist is trained to communicate what they see in a very different way than everybody else. They're trained not to be complacent. And while most of us in a society where we have consumables are trained to be complacent so we can buy stuff. Oversimplification, of course, but that's where these allegories this allegory of the king comes from. And this 1 and 3 Shovels, we're going to look at it in just a bit. I'm going to watch it. I'm going to watch a short video, and then we're going to come back to this and talk about it. So we're not going to watch both of these. We're only going to watch this one. It is pretty short, but hopefully it'll give you enough of information so we can start thinking about what conceptual art is. And this, we can make the argument that all art is conceptual, but the movement that is defined as conceptual art is a little bit different, and we'll talk about that as soon as we finish watching this.
Conceptual art. In the conceptual art movement, ideas are prioritized over the formal or aesthetic aspects of the artworks. Conceptualism has taken many different forms, including performances, happenings, and ephemeral objects. Conceptual artists created works and writings from the mid-1960s to the mid-1970s that completely rejected conventional notions of art. Their main argument implied that issues such as aesthetics, expression, skill, and marketability were not important factors in judging art, and that the mere expression of an artistic idea was sufficient to be considered a work of art. Conceptual artists can trace their influences back to Marcel Duchamp, whose ready-mades appended the very idea of what constitutes a work of art. They have abandoned beauty, rarity, and skill as criteria for judging art, just like Duchamp did before them. Conceptual artists are conscious of the conceptual nature of all art. Many conceptual artists have minimized the use of material in their works to emphasize this. This practice has been dubbed the dematerialization of art by some. Conceptual artists were influenced by minimalism's stark simplicity, but disapproved of its adoption of sculpture and painting conventions as the foundations of artistic creation. Art does not have to resemble a traditional work of art or even take any physical form in the eyes of conceptual artists. Many works of conceptual art are self-aware or self-referential. They push the boundaries of art by using simple materials, including text, just like Duchamp and other modernists did. You will find videos about conceptual artworks in this playlist. If you like the video, leave us a like.
Okay, that is really a simple overview. And you know that the voice is AI generated because it is Duchamp instead of Duchamp. But what the biggest difference is, and I want you to watch this conceptual art ideas as well as this, and each of these you watch the videos. And I'm sorry, that there should be a link right there. I'll have to put that link in. I have to step away from the camera for just a couple minutes. Can we reconvene in about 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Same link? Or do you want me to just hang on here? I'm just working on my project.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording and then I'll record again.
Great. And I'll just hang out.
Okay. All right.